too late. So now that we're recording, I'll let you know that Michael will be in conversation today with Dean Seth Green, and hopefully many of you, should you have questions at the end. But before I turn it over to Seth, I wanted to share a bit of enthusiasm for Michael's thought leadership and pioneering work. We've always seen LSI as part of a much larger movement that is defining a new life stage that we believe has incredible possibilities both for individuals and for society. We're in a historic moment of new longevity where many people are both living healthier, more active lives for longer and increasingly desire opportunities to contribute their wisdom and capabilities in purposeful new ways. The question is, how can we do that when the blueprints of this chapter of life are still nascent and being refined? So Michael has been a true visionary in trying to answer this question and certainly has been at the forefront of this bigger movement and the promise that this life stage can present for individuals, businesses, and for society. Central to his work has been the concept of reimagination and how people in this unique life transition can become reimagineers. Born largely of his experience as a journalist and former president and publishing director of Hearst magazines, where during his tenure, the media industry went through and is still going through a very dramatic transformation. And within that transformation, Michael saw the power of reimagination and how it set up many people for success within a changing landscape, and also how some struggled with a lack of reimagination and trying to stay in a similar lane of their careers when demonstrably that lane no longer existed as it once had. So Michael, thank you for being with us and all you are doing to create a new paradigm and support people in tapping into the promise of this life stage. And with that, Seth, I will turn it over to you and look forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Diana. Thank you all for joining us. As Diana alluded, we are absolutely thrilled and honored to have Michael Clinton with us. I will do the briefest of formal introductions biographically and then welcome him onto the virtual stage here to have a fireside conversation. We'll talk until about the 30 to 35 point in the hour and then eagerly engage your questions so you can begin putting them in the chat now if you have them throughout the conversation. Michael Clinton really needs no introduction. He is a visionary leader, the founder of Roar Forward, a best-selling author, a new longevity expert, a keynote speaker on the changing face of what it means to live longer. He is also a writer at large for Esquire and a regular columnist for Men's Health. And he is the former president and publishing director of Hearst magazines. I should say that he also is someone who takes very seriously having many chapters and many interests in his life. So it's not just something that he writes about. And in that regard, he is also a gifted photographer. He has traveled through 124 countries at the time that I read your biography, but maybe you've been in more countries since then, Michael, although I realize it gets harder and harder because once you're in 124, even if you go to a lot of places, they don't count anymore, so to speak. He has run marathons on 7 continents. That's 7 more continents than I've run them on. He has started a nonprofit foundation, is a private pilot, is a part owner of a vineyard in Argentina, holds 2 master's degrees, and still has a long list of life experiences that he plans to tackle. And that is exactly the spirit that we thought would be perfect for a conversation about roaring into life's second half. And so with that, Michael, let me start with the question of you had already accomplished a lot, including being president of what is a very important publishing powerhouse, Hearst. And at the end of that, you decide to lean in and to become a best-selling author. What motivated you to write Roar into the Second Half of Life to begin with? And then we'll jump into its contents and some of your recommendations.
Yes, thanks, Seth. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm exhausted just hearing that list of things that you put there. I'm sure I'm exhausting a few people. And also, Diana, thank you. And I have such a warm affinity for Chicago. It's a wonderful city. Some of you might know that our team and I launched Oprah's magazine many, many years ago when she was living in Chicago, and I was there many times. And I'm sure people are coming in from all over the country and maybe the world, but I always love visiting Chicago and visiting your campus and so forth. So thank you. You know, one of the things that really motivated me, I was, in my early 60s, and if I was listening to the cultural noise and the cultural voices and the society voices, I was told that I was now supposed to be winding down, that I was, I'd finished this 40-year publishing career, that now was the time where I'm supposed to wind down and move to a sunny state and play golf. Well, I don't play golf, and I'm a New Yorker, and I love New York City, and I plan to stay here. But aside from that, I realized that I was probably, at the time I didn't know it, but I ultimately realized I was part of a new breed of people who in their 60s and 70s and older were saying, I'm ripping up the script. I am not going to follow the script that has been handed to me. I really want to wind up, not wind down, and do many different things. And as I started to peel back the onion, I saw that, if you're 60 and healthy, you may live to be 90 or 100. And you have a very long road ahead of you in terms of reimagining your life, a new chapter in your life, etc. So I went off on this journey to meet people like me. And I found my, if you will, my tribe of people. These were people that I ultimately called the Reimagineers, those who were changing the script by actually doing it, and realized that we're really in the middle of this massive social movement where people living longer are going to change what 60, 70, 80 looks like. So in the book, I interviewed 40 people who were from all walks of life, who were doing all sorts of amazing things in career, in lifestyle, in hobby, in philanthropy, in all spheres of their life. And we've subsequently now collected over 100 stories of these Reimagineers, which people can find on our website, roarforward.com. But it was really to put a spotlight that the second half of life is, we're in this magical time, this magical period in history. Think about this. 90 years ago, the average life expectancy in this country was 62. We've had more growth in life expectancy in the last 100 years than the entire history of the world combined, not just in the US, but in Asia and the EU countries, et cetera. I'm on the board of the Stanford University Center on Longevity, which I know you know, Seth. And the 100-year life is here, and today's 5-year-old has a 50% chance to live to be 100. So we are in this amazing period of time where once upon a time, we saw the beginning of the second half as the end. Now the beginning of the second half is actually a new beginning. And this movement is really a phenomenon that's here with us right now. So that was kind of, as I was on my own personal journey to figure out why I was different than wanting to wind down, is when I came across this idea, and hence the book was born. So,
well, the book is both a very helpful way, and it really does, I think, get into the substance of the book itself, because it is stories. But what you've done is you've provided a framework that is a connective tissue for those stories, because you find that across all of these very distinctive stories, there actually is a formula. And of course, the reason that you are now the founder of Roar Forward is that ROAR is the acronym that encapsulates that formula, and it's reimagine yourself, the R, own who you are, the O, act on what's next, the A, and then reassess your relationships, the R again. And so I'm curious if we can just walk through each of those 4 steps in this next chapter journey. And let me just say, as someone in my mid-40s, that I think this is a formula that is for anyone in transitions. And I know we have people on this Zoom that are in their 40s and 50s, as well as 60s, 70s, 80s. And I think that if you're at that point of thinking beyond your primary longstanding career, then this is a formula that can really be tried and true to how you get there. And so starting with that first one, let's reimagine yourself. What does that mean? Why does it matter, and how do you do it? And maybe you can even bring a story or two, forward in relationship to each of these core themes in the book.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you much. You're absolutely right. This is a thought and a process that you can do if you're 30, or you can do it if you're 80. In fact, I'll give a headline sort of. I was on a Zoom earlier today with someone, Alan Patricof. You might know the name. He's viewed as the founder of venture capital, and he's a good friend and has been part of the Roar community. He's a great example. At 82, he launched a new business, a new venture fund. At 87, he was the oldest participant in the New York City Marathon. And at 89, he just got remarried. He was a widow. His wife of 50 years had died, and he just got remarried last December. And so the reimagination process is one that can be beneficial to you at 80 or 90 or 30 or 40. And the idea is reimagining is very much a process. And in the book, we talk about some of the tools in terms of how you can do this. How do you set a rhythm in your life, much like you have a rhythm in your life on other things? It might be yoga, it might be taking a walk, it might be anything that is integrated into your daily routine. How do you integrate the reimagination process into that daily routine, which, by the way, can be integrated into your morning walk as you're walking your dog on the beach, as I did this morning with my beautiful Vishla Hannah. You can do that process anywhere. The question becomes, what is your favorite future and what does it look like? And what I found with all the people that I interviewed is you don't solve this in a weekend. You don't solve this in a week. Most of the people who went through this process told me that it took them a year or two, because first you have to make the decision that you want to reimagine a part of your life, whatever that might be. And as you know, 50% of it is mental to get yourself there. Then when do you begin and how do you begin that first step? Because that first step is so significant in how you begin that reimagination process. And then, finally, how do you get yourself on that road? So I'll give you an example to your point. A woman who was in her 50s, who was a sales and marketing executive her whole career, married, a couple of kids, and she had always wanted to be a mystery writer. This was something she was interested in doing since she was a young woman, and I'll allude to this a little later in the conversation. And she began to take it seriously around 57 years old and said, how do I really now engage and act on this? My favorite future is I want to really be a writer, said she. So she started taking courses online, free courses. She took the Dan Brown master class. You all know Dan Brown, the writer. She joined the Mystery Writers Guild of America. She joined a writers group. She said it took her sort of a year before she even put pen to paper. And she wrote her first book, which was rejected by every publisher possible. And then she wrote a second book, and she found a publisher, actually a publisher in the UK, who published her book. She is 67. She has now written 7 books with this publisher. And she identifies as a mystery novelist and a mystery writer. She left her sales and marketing, background behind. But she said, I can be a writer for the rest of my life, and that was her pivot. But she couldn't get there until she started reimagining what it really was that she wanted in the next stage of her life. So the fundamental question is, what is your favorite future? It's a very individualized answer. And a lot of it is, you don't have to boil the ocean. You don't have to do it in 10 different areas. Pick the one thing where you really want a fundamental shift, change, and start beginning that process of the reimagination. So the R is really the tools and the action plan around it, sort of give you some guidelines as to how you can do that and engage on that. So that's the first R.
Well, so the next theme is own who you are. And so you have begun to think about where you may want to go in this reimagination, and you've begun to plan for it. Own who you are, what does that mean, and how do you do it?
Yeah, well, first of all, when we're at midlife, let's pick 50, because I've talked about the 100-year life. So let's just use that as the number. When we're 50, we've had a lot of life experience, right? Good, bad, we've made good decisions, bad decisions. We've had good things happen, bad things happen to us in one way, shape, or form. And we end up carrying a lot of that burden with us. And with that comes a lot of self-imposed ageism, where we start saying, well, life has passed me by. Well, I can't do this. Well, I can't do that because of my age. So part of it is, you got to own your past, and you got to move forward, in terms of all the collective experiences that you've had. to put them into a positive moving forward moment. The other thing is, you know, in order to really pivot in lots of different ways, you have to have some really fundamentals in place. And one of them obviously is core health metrics. You know, it's amazing to me how many 50-year-old people I know who've not had a colonoscopy or don't know what their blood pressure is or don't have an annual physical. You know, it is a bit of a cliche, but health is really the foundation of so many things. It allows us to do so many things. So own your health numbers, own your financial numbers, give yourself the elasticity and flexibility, own your age. You know, a part of what we do is very pro-age. If anyone follows me on LinkedIn, they will see we're very pro-age on the kinds of things that we showcase and talk about in terms of moving forward. And so, you know, owning who you are at this moment in time is so important in order for you to go forward, and to also, you know, forgive yourself for your past, you know, pitfalls, and be able to move yourself into a more positive direction. So we do a lot more in the book, but that's the O of the own overall.
Can I dig in, Michael, on the own
Yeah.
your age piece? Because it's not easy in the sense that we have a culture that really prizes youth. I'm just thinking about your old industry being, you know, head of a magazine. My sense is that, you know, the pictures out there are overwhelmingly young people, and, you know, old, let's say above 50 now represents something like 40 to 50% of Americans, but you rarely see them. And if you see them, it's, you know, Depends commercials. So can you just talk a little bit about, you know, what you're up against, how you do it? Because it's something that I think is a challenge in the sense that people know there's this prizing of, you know, young identity. And so how do you approach that honestly, where you own it, but you also know that the deck is sometimes set against you, if that's a fair way to.
You're absolutely right. And it's a very big part of what our business is all about, which I know we will get to. But we do live, you know, what is forgotten is the youth culture was created for the baby boomers. But prior to the boomers, youth culture as we know it didn't really exist. The problem is, the challenge is the boomers grew up and started moving into older cohorts. And by the way, the first millennials turned 50 in 6 years. So right now, I mean, you think about that, just pause and think about that for a moment, right? Right now, you have 35% of the country is 50 plus. That will grow exponentially. By the way, the spending power of the 50 plus community would be the third largest GDP in the world in terms of just the US market, $8 trillion of spending power. And yes, of course, there are the haves and the have-nots in that group, but the spending power is enormous and the asset base is enormous. And so we say that the 50 plus market is the new growth market for marketers, and they need to wake up and start representing people 50 plus, not only represent them in an inclusive, integrated way, but represent them in modern interpretations and contemporary images, in whether it's editorial or media or advertising or entertainment. One of the members of our group at Roar is a woman named Amy Bayer, who's a Hollywood producer, and she's just launched a company where she's creating romantic comedies for people over 50 with actors and actresses over 50. And so she has, her next big film is with Renee Zellweger, about a woman who's going through a big change in her life as she approaches 60, and it's a romantic comedy. And so I think we need images in all sorts of media. And one of the things that, you know, we are always on the hunt for is, you know, what are those positive images? I kind of make the analogy that if you go back to the cliches of how women were represented before the women's movement in the 70s, it was all very stereotypical and cliche in many ways. And today you see that with the 50 plus market, and blowing that up and disrupting that will not only have, the people will force it, the people will make that happen, and companies will have to respond accordingly. And so this is, we're already seeing the sprouts of this happening in the marketplace.
Well, so to take a step back from the societal level to the individual, you had laid out the first two. We're reimagining ourselves, we're owning who we are. Next step that you have for us individuals is act on what's next. Can you kind of talk about what that looks like, how
Sure.
people do it, and really that idea of what's next rather than knowing the entire journey, which I think is something that you know at 18 or 22, you know, that you're not going to figure it all out and you're just going to have to take a leap of faith. But I think can be harder when you've had a life that has brought you more certainty and now you have to take that leap again. But how do you do it?
So the core of the A is something we call life layering, which is very understandable as a formula. Anyone can do it at any age. It is, I tried to make this book, fun and informative, not homework, if you will. And here's sort of the cliff notes. When you're in midlife, you've put a lot of your identity in what we call the 3 Ps. Your profession, your parenting, and your partner. Now, you may not have all 3 Ps. You may not have a partner. You may not have kids, et cetera, but you're probably working. And so the professional identity, especially for professional managerial people, becomes all encompassing, right? And what happens is we self-identify through some iteration of our 3 Ps. And the question we ask is, who are you when you set those 3 Ps aside? They're important. They're always a part of you. But how else do you identify yourself? And many times people have a really hard time saying, I'm also X or Y, because we invest so much of our time in the 3 Ps. So the life layering approach is to build other personas for yourself. So I'll give you a great example. When I was 39 years old, I was the publisher of GQ. Great job, right? I had a great family life, great love life, great all of that stuff. But I realized that I was the most boring person I knew, because all I did was work, work, work. And I was definitely one of those people who was, defining myself by my job. And I decided that I was at 40, I was going to shake it up. And this is when life layering really became sort of my thesis. And I have an adventure gene in me. So I decided when I was 40, I was going to go climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I was going to take a flying lesson, and I was going to take a race car driving lesson. Now, some people might say that was a midlife crisis, but I would say that was like a midlife awakening, that I wanted to do these things because I had this adventure gene. I had identified this thing in me that I wanted to, sort of trigger. So I ended up becoming a pilot, as you mentioned, and I've hiked many mountains since then. But I decided my 40s were going to be my adventure years and my adventure travel years. And so flash forward, I could give you a whole hour on my whole adventure persona and how I built that persona that is a separate persona than my 3 Ps. So life layering is a way to say, how do you really step back and say, these are the things that I want to be doing. Once again, could be a hobby, could be volunteering, could be philanthropy, could be lots of different things. But what are those things for you as an individual? So that's life layering. That's the action plan.
Well, I want to say that as a school, I think we actually have in our community a lot of people with that intellectual adventure gene. So as the university where fun comes to die, I'm not sure it's the race car driving and flying, but the intellectual adventure gene, if I want to read great books and I want to go deeply into different forms of arts, that is, I think, very core. And many people, I think, see it as, especially as their kids grow up and they have both time and are looking for what else is in that portfolio. I've always had this intellectual curiosity. How do I satisfy that? How do I find a place where I can be at home with others who have this same possibility set? And we do see many of our community members really defining themselves partly in that context of being a lifelong and insatiable learner. So we absolutely see it here in many forms.
You touch on something that was a thread in the Reimagineer persona. And by the way, we've done a lot of research around this Reimagineer person. And you touched on it, Seth, this curiosity, this lifelong learning strain, this desire to learn something new, this desire to always be on top of, whatever it is that their interest is very much part of the core. A lot of people ask me, is it nature or nurture? Is somebody born this way or does somebody become this way? And I would argue there's, a lot of what we discovered is that, a lot of it is nature. that there are those people, and many people who come to your community obviously have that inherent because they wouldn't be there if they didn't. But no, absolutely. And, I think you referenced, I had my master's degrees. I started a second master's degree at the age of 66. So I was a lifelong learner. I went to Columbia and got a master's degree in philanthropy because it was very interesting to me. It was interesting being a full-time student and having to do a capstone and all of that, but I thrived on it. So I think there is a nature part to that, but I think you can also nurture it. And so, yeah, for sure, lifelong learning is a big part of it.
Well, so final R is reassess your relationships. We'd love a snapshot of that. And then I want to jump into some bigger societal questions that relate, and then we're going to come to the audience.
Yeah, so the final R is the importance of our relationships that hold us back in particular. And when we're at midlife, we have a lot of that. We may have carried somebody who was a friend in college who is, saying, well, why do you want to do that? Or why do you want to do this? And they may be a very negative force in your life. Who are the people in your life at midlife who are really supportive of any kind of reimagination process that you might want to go through? My best example of that is a woman who her kids were grown and she wanted to go back to school and get a master's degree in nutrition and start a new career as a nutritionist. And her kids and her husband were giving her a really hard time about going back to school. And I said, how old are your kids? She said, well, one is 30 and one is like 27. I'm like, wait a minute, I hope you're not doing their laundry. And, it was like time taken away from the kids and the husband. And she, those relationships which are so core, you have to obviously get the buy-in. So her solution was, she said, okay, I'm going to take one course. So she took one course. She got him kind of used to it. And then she said, I'm going to take another course. And then she went on to finish her master's degree. But you have to find, the relationship support. I always say to people, here's your test. Go home and say to your partner, you know what, let's move to Australia. And what kind of reaction would you get? Your partner, one side of the equation go, yeah, let's go. Let's have an adventure. What are we going to do? How are you going to do it? The other side is like, what are you, crazy? I'm not even going to think about that. So what are the dynamics of your most important relationships, and where's your navigation? The key that you want is to find the people who are going to help you, really support you to move forward in a new way. A few weeks ago, I was at a graduation ceremony for a woman who was 60, who just finished veterinary school. And she said, I'll be a veterinarian for 20 or 25 years, and that's a perfectly fine career. She had a whole separate career prior to that. But she had an incredibly supportive husband. The kids were gone. She was able to quit her job. Fortunately, she had the financial resources through her husband. So every situation is different, but finding those people that are really going to be the proverbial wind beneath your wings, so to speak, is really important. So we spent a lot of time on that in the book as well.
Well, I want to now begin to kind of widen our aperture, because we've been talking mainly, Michael, about how individuals approach this in the context of society and its approaches to longevity. And I now want to kind of move from the individual level to the societal. And maybe we should start just by laying a little bit of groundwork with what you now do, because after writing this book, you realized that there was a business opportunity that also simultaneously could help as a societal solve, right, which is what you came to earlier. There's a huge marketplace here. People are missing it, and that's bad for business. It's also bad for society because we're not really harnessing the power of this full community. So can you talk a little bit about Roar Forward, maybe give us the elevator pitch, so to speak, and then I want to jump into some of your observations coming out of the new platform that you stand on with Roar Forward.
So I would say up front, this was not the grand plan. When the book had hit a chord, I ended up developing a business plan, which led to the business. We now do business with over 50 companies. We're a B2B business. Our mission and our goal is to raise the awareness with C-suite leadership, nonprofit leadership, institutional leadership, that this longevity phenomena is here and sweeping the world, and will have enormous implications, not only for their business, but for the workplace, for their employees, for government policy, for media, for many all dimensions of our society and culture. Once again, not just in the U.S., but in Asia. And Asia is, I'm off to Singapore next month. Singapore is one of the leading countries that has really addressed this from a business and government standpoint in terms of their population. As you probably know, Japan is the oldest country in the world, and an amazing amount of things happening there. So our goal is to work with C-suite leadership to really say, you need to know this. You need to be aware of this. It has lots of implications for your products, your services, your marketing, your advertising, your employees, your consumer. And so we have, as you know, a business intelligence report and bulletins that go to our subscribers. We do lots of webinars. We do lots of workshops. We're doing a lot of, we have consultancies. We have a big global consultancy with a company where we're around the world with them, helping them reposition themselves. I would also say we have a free newsletter which people can sign up for at roarforward.com. It's a little bit more B2C, but all of our work is really in the B2B space. Yeah.
Well, so I want to, kind of leverage that experience you've had, Michael, because you've been looking at these big questions. And I was struck reading in the newsletter that you create just how transformational this is for the workplace. I mean, I'm thinking about your recent issue, which is all about how this is transformational for the real estate market, the media landscape, obviously universities where I sit and where it's, I mean, truly been an immense blessing for the Graham School because we're the home of lifelong learning. And so many people in the second half of life want to discover this real intellectual passion for its own sake and not for, an instrumental goal. For communities as a whole, as we see the age pyramid flatten. So can you talk, I mean, you've looked at this now for years. What do you see as the 2 or 3 most profound changes that longevity is unleashing? And after this, I promise to those who have put questions in, we're coming to your questions next. So this is my last one for Michael.
Yeah, I could, obviously do a whole 2 hours on that, but I'm going to give you some points. One is, the workplace is going through profound changes as a result of the longevity phenomenon. There are 10,000 people a day in America turning 65, and many of them would like to continue working. The way the business construct is right now is that people are sort of moved out, if you will, and that is will have to change because people will want to work longer, will need to work longer, and will be able to work longer. And so I think you're going to see that happen. And by the way, that's on all levels of employment. That's just not, professional managerial, because we don't have enough people to do the jobs. There aren't enough people. It's a combination of our current immigration policies, as well as people exiting the workplace. And in the senior levels of business, there aren't enough people in the let's call it the Gen X generation to fill those slots. So there is an enormous crisis that's emerging. I wrote a story on this for Esquire, which is once again on the website, called "The Seismic Change That's About to Hit the American Workplace." And it's really a call to action. And you may have seen that Larry Fink from BlackRock came out and said, we have got to get rid of this institutionalized concept of retirement at 65, pick a number. 65 is no longer the number. So workplace is going to go through massive changes, and that includes the benefit of multi-generational workplace, new work models, people working longer, people working in different kinds of ways. You may have seen the Times or the Journal piece last week about how small cities there are no people for the jobs. So they're hiring people back, quote, retirees, to do jobs in their local government and their local police force and so forth, because there aren't people. There are no people there. So workplace is a really big one. I'll give you one more, and because of time constraints, and that is what I will call the significance of the let's call it urban planning, community living, aging at home. Most people want to age at home. most people will be able to age at home because of technology and because of AI and because of access. There's a lot of discussion that people will have their med room, the way they have their media room. So they may have their med room where all of their vitals are being tracked and so on and so forth. This is is coming into the future. We have in our next Roar Bulletin, we have a whole story on this with a new project in the UAE called the Longeva City. It is being said that it will be the first city that will be built with an aging population in mind. And the UN also has a site called Age-Friendly Cities. Those cities and communities who are really adapting to this longevity phenomena in terms of how they're rebuilding cities, renovating cities. When I'm in Singapore next month, there's a whole neighborhood that's being deconstructed and reconstructed for the aging population. So I think you're going to see a lot of activity in urban planning, age-friendly cities, smart homes, AI-infused homes, and allow people to age at home. This is a very, very big subject that has global implications, societal implications. So I'll stop there because I could go on and on, but you get the sense.
Well, we have a lot of great questions in the chat for you. And I'll start back at the individual level again. This is someone who says, before you reimagine your new life, how do you know when to let your prior dream go? And how do you mourn that loss and move on to reimagine your new dreams? And having read your book, I know you spent a lot of time. And how do you deal with regret? Because that can be a barrier to being able to reimagine and to move forward. But at the same time, it's very real. And especially if you have that experience, you might come at the possibility of a new dream with some skepticism or discouragement. So how do you approach that? And, are there people that you worked with in your experience? I know there were small setbacks, but you got to be president of Hearst and saw that first dream and then move on to the second. Did you talk to some people who didn't get that first dream completed, but still were able to reimagine? How did they do it?
Yeah, no, it's a great enlightenment moment whenever one can sort of acknowledge that they're not going to get to the place where they thought they might go. And so, releasing yourself from that is critical. But what I would say is on that journey of midlife, you learn a lot of things. You get exposed to a lot of things. You see a lot of things that may, in fact, if you step back and really go through that reimagination process, you see a thread that may take you in a completely different journey that you didn't have when you were 25 or 30. And I think that's important to identify that thread and see where you may want to go. The other example of that, though, is I say one of the tools in the life layering process is go back to your younger self, because there were other things in your younger self that you may have wanted to do that you maybe can pick up. So I'm going back to the woman who became the novelist. She wanted to be a novelist, and she picked up a younger dream. But going back to my former example, I'll give you a great story it's in the Reimagineer profiles on the website, a guy named Jacob Lewis, who was in the book publishing world in New York, very educated, very brainy. He never really became, a top editor or the top president of a book company, which is what he thought about. And he stepped back and he ended up acknowledging that he always had this incredible interest and love of the outdoors. And he ended up going to this outdoor EMT program where he was a skier and a hiker and he loved the outdoors. And he completely changed his life. And now is focused on being an outdoors EMT person in major ski resorts in the Sierra Nevadas. He and his wife moved out to California. She was able to work out there, et cetera. So he sort of stepped back and said, what do I really love? I love the outdoors. What can I do in the context of that love? And that is, a good example. And he sort of released himself from this other set of, career paths. And maybe some frustrations that he had, and completely reinvented himself in another way. That would be a good example.
We have another question here from an own perspective, OWN, that is, in your second theme in Roar. You mentioned not having age constraints, core physical health, and core financial. Can you share your perspective on investing in your mental health as fuel or driver of change going forward? And talk a little bit maybe about how to think about mental health as a foundation, which I know you do in your book, to being able to reimagine.
Well, the topical response to that is a lunch that I had here in New York today with Dr. Mark Lax from Weill Cornell Medicine. Weill Cornell Medicine is our science partner and our medical partner with Roar Forward. And we were having this very discussion about the importance of mental health. And, one of the things that he talks about, and he is a geriatrician by training, but he's become sort of the guru at Weill Cornell around the longevity medicine. And what he would say is that some of the core things to get, good mental health are things like mindfulness, are things like meditation. He would say getting a good night's sleep is better than any pill. He would say that some of the fundamentals like movement lead to strong mental health and good feelings. And we all know that the number one thing in healthy aging and successful aging is movement. You have to move every day. You have to do things that are giving you balance and flexibility and strength, and that releases a lot of our chemicals that make us feel better and feel stronger at the same time. So he, from a science standpoint, he comes at it from from some of those kinds of components. We're assuming at that point there's not some deep-seated issue which is creating a mental health concern, which may need more focus and treatment. But he thinks there are a lot of fundamental things like that that really lead to a strong mental health and mental outlook.
So I'm going to ask you a few power round questions because we're down to 2 minutes. I want to get a few in. How do you think the age of the U.S. presidential candidates may be influencing our perceptions of age, in particular in the U.S. right now? And not only am I asking a difficult question, but your short response to it on top of it, Michael.
I think age should not be a topic. I think it should be about, ability, competence, performance, all the above. Let's face it, as we age and as we live longer, we are going to have things that are going to be, we're biological beings. We are going to have things that are going to break down physically, mentally, etc. But just this weekend, it was interesting. I posted something on LinkedIn about the designer Giorgio Armani. Giorgio Armani has just turned 90. He is, obviously, he runs his namesake line. He is the chairman and the CEO of his company. They just posted some of the best results in their 50-year history. They have $1 billion in cash. It's a phenomenal business story. He's 90. And, he is, so I think that it's you said it earlier, we're hung up as a culture on age. And I think more and more of what will happen as people who are living longer and excelling longer, I think this generation is going to change the conversation. I always say that the boomers were the original activists, and their new cause is redefining what aging will look like, because they're in it.
Yeah. Well, and I always remind people, when they think about, older people in government, Anthony Fauci got us through COVID. He's 83. And, he had about the most youthful, not to put that word into the mix, which has its own biases, but, an energetic leadership of anyone. Our final question for you comes from Mario Bravo. He says he really enjoys the societal aspects of this. There is a way out of ageism and other limitations imposed by our prevailing culture. He's interested in how these societal changes are being addressed by other societies. And so are there a few examples that come to mind of how non-US countries and cultures are approaching this that we can learn from as we end?
Yeah, so I think look to Asia once again. I think Asia is the future of the Western world in terms of their perceptions on aging. First of all, they have a very different cultural definition. And it is, so I think what happens, I'm going to go back to Singapore, because Singapore has a government policy of 70 action points around this topic, which you can look up in terms of government policy. And there is much more of a reverence for all of the things that age brings. So I would argue that the future the place to look for our future is in Korea and Japan and Singapore, and to an extent even China. Because they're all grappling with significantly the life expectancy in those countries are almost 10 years more than in our country.
Wow.
And for women in many of those countries, it's approaching 90. For men, it's 87. And we could talk about why, a combination of things, and maybe getting back to the mental health question, there is, a part of that there in terms of the cultural approach to it. But I would say that's the place to look.
Well, Michael, this has been a fascinating conversation. We have loved this opportunity to dig into your immense knowledge, and we look forward as a university to continuing to be engaged with Roar Forward and thinking about how we can potentially collaborate with you in this work. Thank you for your time, and thank you all for joining us. Have a great afternoon for everyone in, I guess, our country, and good evening or morning to those elsewhere in the world. Thanks again.
Thank you, Seth. Thanks everyone for joining in.